By the early 1990s, Nissan's original Micra, the K10, was starting to look a little bit long in the tooth. It had been popular with buyers who wanted an economical and reliable car, but it was looking a little bit dated. So in January 1992, the K11 appeared, exactly 10 years after the K10 had first shown its face to the world, initially in Japan and then December in Europe, but the second generation Nissan Micra was here. There were really only two criticisms levelled at the original K10 Micra. Firstly, it rusted, and that's pretty common to most Japanese cars of that era. And secondly, it was a bit boxy and kind of lacked character. And so the new car was designed with the European market in mind. It was much more curvy, much more bubbly looking, much more cute, and that was the order of the day with the styling and design of the car. And just look at this face, isn't it cute? You couldn't hate a Nissan Micra Mark II, it'd be like kicking a puppy. Isn't it sweet? In fact, the advertising for this car was based around a bubbly cartoon version of the thing, and it really works. They shifted like hotcakes here in the UK and back in Japan and everywhere else they sold the thing. Inside this car is also much cuter, much rounder, much softer looking than the K10 was. There are curves everywhere. In fact, you would struggle to find very many straight lines anywhere in this car. The instrument binnacle has gone from a box on the dashboard to this curvy little kind of ellipse on top. And indeed, everything else is far more round. Just this round is the theme in here. Even the tea shelf is now far rounder. I mean, there's only one area here where you can securely place a cup with no fear of tea spillage. The other area here, fortunately, is segregated by this little ridge because that's already straight into an incline and a curve just in front of the passenger. Poorly thought out. Now this car is an L spec, which puts it one nubbin above absolute basic poverty and potential pain. You don't get much extra for your money, but you do get two really good standard items, which are an airbag, which in various markets around the world the airbag was standard on every level. In other markets the airbag was an option depending how far the tree you climbed. And this car also came with a radio and an aerial, plus two speakers, and this door card which actually rises to the top. There's no body coloured metal on show, which makes it feel a lot more grown up and more civilised. Now, a big difference between this car and the previous generation is the fact that you now have this centre console which reaches all the way down to the carpet, and the fact that the dashboard is also being rounder, it's also fuller as well. It makes all the plastic area feel bigger and a little bit more encroaching onto your personal space inside the car. Not that it's a bad thing, because you've now got a more practical interior. You've got a cubby hole down here for putting things, you've got a door pocket on the driver's side, nothing on the passenger side, and you have a little pull-off thing for your fuses. I won't pull that again. You have a small tray below the steering wheel, which you can again put odds and sods and bits and pieces that need storing, and of course you have a reasonably good sized glove box in there as well. In terms of comfort inside the car, the seats are more supportive than they were in the previous generation. They've got a nice kind of thick level of padding in there. It's not spongy, but it is quite soft, and you do have a little bit of support on the side. These little bolsters don't come out too far, but it's not the kind of car you're going to be really hammering through a corner anyway. On the dashboard itself, the controls are fairly Spartan. You have actual levelling headlights, which for such a small car, that doesn't necessarily seem like an essential item, because you're going to struggle to get enough weight in the back of the car to really need to be angling the headlights down. So it's a nice thing to have, but not strictly very useful. You do have internally adjustable but manual mirrors, which is a step up from the pushy glass on the previous car. Along top of here, between your two air vents, you've got a heated rear window, useful, hazard lights, essential, and this model also gets an immobiliser, and here's a little light flashing to say the car is immobilised and alarmed. This radio is a significant improvement and step up from the previous generation. It's a proper digital FM radio cassette player. A problem these have is that the screens fail, and this car's screen had failed. The owner has actually found an identical model, so it's back to standard with the correct Nissan Blaupunkt radio cassette, which looks awesome. And below that, of course, we have our regular heating, direction, fan speed controls. No air conditioning, it was an option. In fact, the options you could get across this car were relatively good. the airbag, which is sometimes standard, ABS, again sometimes standard, electric windows, again sometimes standard, central locking, again sometimes standard, air conditioning, sometimes standard at the very, very top of the range, and power steering, although probably not really necessary. That's many things you can have. Being very, very low in the range, although you do get an ashtray to put your sweet wrappers, the actual lighter socket itself, your 12-volt outlet, as it would be today, it's just blanked off, which is a real shame because that'd be really handy for your sat-nav or to charge your phone. Now the headroom in here is fantastic, and I've got a ton of space between my bumps and the headlining, which is like a hard kind of felt lined thing, which isn't going to drop like it does on a lot of other cars of, well, the 80s and 90s. This is going to stay there forever. You do get twin sun visors, which is nice. No mirrors and no lights though. The only light you get in here is this one in the centre of the car. In the back of the car, oh dear, in the back of the car you will find a radio mic from a clumsy person. You will find the same exciting party-themed interior fabrics as in the front of the car, and you'll also find 3 seat belts, as this is a proper 5-seater car. No pull-down armrest in the centre, but you do have 2 3-point and 1 2-point seat belt, so it is relatively safe well, for the time. I say safe. Elephant in the room at the moment. When it was launched, the car was considered fairly safe. It's got a crash structure in the shell. It's got crash bars in the doors. By 1997, when it was Euro NCAP'd, it only got 2 stars. So probably best not to crash it really. The knee room's quite good, but curiously the ankle room is a bit tight. Lots of headroom again, but nothing but a kind of moulded armrest, which is a little bit clunky for your funny bone. On the K10 Micra review, I said wrongly that the rear windows didn't open because the aftermarket seatbelts hid the catches, so it looked like there weren't any opening windows. On this car, I can confidently say the rear windows don't open. There are no catches that I'm missing here. Interestingly, there are blanking holes for grab handles, which are deleted on this model of the car. Perhaps on the more advanced versions, you will find them. The other thing I found in the back here is the owner's manual, the original book from this car, which tells you everything you need to know. And very thorough it is too. Do-it-yourself operations, power steering, haha, not there. Brake fluid reservoir, there is there. Change the air cleaner, change the battery. It's very, very comprehensive. It's not that long ago, it's like 25, 30 years ago, but people were expected to do an awful lot more maintenance on their cars back then than they are now. Let's see what the boot's like. Now, the boot of this car, although it's in very good condition, isn't massive. It's reasonably wide, it goes back a fair way, but it does kind of trapezoid in on itself, and the boot floor is only just there, so you don't get a lot of space in terms of depth. Underneath the carpet, you do have, rather commendably, a full-size spare wheel. This Dunlop tyre looks like it's never, well, it has never been on the road. It's still got the nice coloured line printed on the rubber. I can't find the date, but I think it may have come with the car back in 1997. This is a 22-year-old tyre, but it's been in the dark all its life, and let's hope it's never needed. And curiously, of course, or amusingly, in keeping with most Micras that are bought either by old people for their last car or young people learning to drive, this car does have a set of L plates in the back, and its first owner was an old lady. Now let's get this out on the road and find out if the K11 was really imbued with more character than the K10. Well, first of all, I can say the switchgear does feel an awful lot nicer. It's much rounder. It's more ergonomic, I should say. So as you indicate, you put the headlights on because it's dark in this tunnel of trees, everything feels quite nice, a thick, heavy quality of plastic. Although I would say the controls themselves do feel very light. And that is something else that's carried over from the previous generation of the car. The lightness, and the steering isn't power assisted, but wow, it feels like I've got like city mode activated on like my Fiat Punto or something, the really, really overly assisted. Because it's interesting, because it's not that low geared. It's going through the corners, and I'm not having to turn the wheel that far, but I'm still having to put in virtually no effort whatsoever. Does roll. That also carries over from the previous generation. There's a fair amount of body roll in the car, hitting a 30 limit now, so we'll slow down to a less body rolly kind of a speed. And its gearbox, as before, is fingertip light. Just knock it through with your fingers. It's still very, very easy to change. The gate is lovely and the action is lovely, but I will say It's not quite as smooth and slick as it was previously. I'm not sure what will have changed in that instance, or maybe it's just because this car has only got 15,500 miles on it. Maybe it's not worn in yet. Maybe that's all the problem is. That's not really a problem. That's just so fresh. Now this car comes with the 1 litre engine. There were 2 choices, the 1 litre and the 1.3 at launch. Later on, after the second facelift, there's a 1.4 as well. But those engines were an all new for this model, aluminium block, aluminium head, 16 valve, twin overhead cam, fuel injected unit. The names of these things, sparklingly, were the CG10DE and the CG13DE. Can you guess which was which? And they were light, free revving, quite fun units. This being the 1 litre, it makes 54 horsepower and it gets 58 foot-pound of torque, which throws it at the scenery at 16.3 seconds to 0 to 60 and gives a top speed of 93 miles an hour. However, with this nice 5-speed box in there, it is relatively entertaining to drive. Like the previous generation, the handling characteristics are relatively neutral. They border on understeer. If you start pushing hard into a bend, the car will kind of keep going more or less in a straight line until it does finally grab some traction, and the car rolls like crazy. Like the previous generation, it's an inoffensive thing, but they have added a little bit of charm to it. The instrumentation, like the rest of the interior, is basic at best. Looking at this binnacle in front of me, I have got basically 3 bits of information. The engine temperature, the speed, which is the speed, and the fuel gauge. And the only other extraneous bit of information I now have is the time. I can tell it's 5 to 3 at the moment. But then, unless you're actually heel towing it and trying to hit optimum performance, you're not going to need a tacho on this thing, are you? And a lap timer, I'm guessing, would be wasted. The brakes are pretty good, actually. I had the original buyer of this car stumped up the extra few pounds and gone for the 1.3 litre engine. They would have been rewarded with 74 horsepower and 75 foot-pound of torque, which gives the car an improved 12-second 0 to 60 and a top speed of over 100 at 106 miles an hour. And the only trade-off is that the 1 litre gets 47 mpg combined and the 1.3 gets 46. I think it's worth paying that price. If you are a fan of dull motoring trivia, and I know I am, and if you're watching this channel, there's a fairly good chance you are too, you'll recall that the Nissan Bluebird I drove recently was the first model produced in Sunderland by the British Nissan plant, NMUK. Well, this was the second. This and the Primera, which went in at about the same time. I think this pipped the Primera just slightly to the post. So yeah, this is motoring history. This was built in 3 factories around the world. It was built in Japan, it was built in Britain. So overall, in terms of it being a day-to-day practical consideration, I think I like this car more. It's a little bit safer than the original K10. It's got a bit more practicality and it's got better fuel economy. It's just a slightly more rounded, more versatile package. In terms of retro charm, I don't think you can beat that original square 1980s look of the K10. That was, pretty much more of its time. It's going to become a classic a bit sooner than this is because it's 10 years older, which is an interesting fact actually. Both of the K10 and the K11 ran for 10 years with only minor facelifts. Even though there aren't as many of these around as there used to be, if you could find one, it would make a great daily driver. In fact, the guy who's bought this car is learning to drive in it. Because if you've managed to find one that's avoided the tin worm, then you know it's a solid car. It's got a great engine with a timing chain that's not going to go wrong. You've got great visibility all round as previously because you've still got slightly thicker than before, but still, compared to modern cars, quite thin A-pillars and B-pillars. Amazingly cheap running costs. 47 miles to the gallon and dirt cheap insurance. This is an ideal car. If you want to run a car as a new driver, a learner, or as someone trying to keep the car motoring budget down, you really couldn't go wrong with this thing. Now in 1993, this claimed a notable first when it was named European Car of the Year, and that was the first ever Japanese designed car to receive that acclaim. And I suppose they must have been pretty impressed with that, because they kept the design as was until 1997, when it got a new slight facelift with new bumpers and lights. Nothing really changed significantly until 2000, when it got a refresh again, more significant again. Bumpers and lights changed, but most importantly, they changed the engine. The 1.3 was dropped in favour of a 1.4, and notably, the rear wiper was updated so that it now parks along the bottom of the glass rather than upright in the middle, which looks like it's been turned off at the wrong moment on these earlier vehicles. Now, pushing through this back road here, it grips pretty well, but it does feel like it doesn't want to be doing this kind of thing. In a way that's kind of rewarding, because I'm not going massively quickly and I'm having a whale of a time just pushing the car a little bit through the bends, and importantly, not at insane speeds. Yeah, uphill is where the 1 litre feels like it's bogging and could use a little bit more power. But once you're on the flat, and certainly on a downhill, it's got plenty of oomph. Yeah. But this thing is absolutely time warp. I mean, as I say, 15,000 miles. And the first owner was an old lady who kept it for several years, and it was serviced on the button every year. Oil change and main dealer service every year, regardless how few miles it had driven. One of the front tyres was starting to perish after a while. She changed all 4 of them. One of the shocks was starting to mist a bit of oil on it. Changed all 4 of them. So this car has been lavished with care. The only thing that lets it down is the fact it was stored, or it lived outside. So the interior plastics have really started to deteriorate in a way I've actually never seen before. It's like a dog's chewed them, or someone has like a dozen signet rings with diamonds on every hand, and there's been rubbing them against there. It's just, no. My old friend Mr. Sandpaper Hands has been on this, both of these door handles. Luckily the steering wheel, I don't know what the steering wheel and gear knob are made of, it's like a thick rubber, but it survived perfectly. The dashboard has no hint of cracking, no hint of warping. It's excellent, really. Back in the day, there was a one-make rally series for these things, and this is still like an entry-level rally car for a lot of people. And in terms of sort of banger stock car racing, these shells are incredibly popular. You'll see a lot of the younger stock car racers crying out for these shells. The only thing that really lets this car down is the same as the previous generation, and that is the fact that they rust. They rust like crazy. By the time the first facelift kit rolled around, the earlier cars were already starting to rust in their sills, and you could spot a car that someone was actually taking care of by the fact it had got plate welded just behind the front wheel arch on the sill. And like so many, well, Japanese cars, in fact many cars of the 80s really, it wasn't purely endemic of Japanese vehicles, it was everything, but they did seem to be a little worse because they didn't seem to underseal them as well as European cars at the time. Although this car, electrically, mechanically, it would see out its owners, and many of them did. Like one case in point. Bodily, they did rot like crazy, and this is why you just don't see very many of them anymore. It was only a few short years ago, every road you drove down, there would be a Mk2 Micra somewhere in sight. You couldn't throw a rock. There was like 800,000 of them on the road, according to Honest John, about 5 years ago. I can't remember the last time I saw one now. As I say, this car was sold all around the world. In Japan it was known as the Nissan March, and there was one really interesting little special edition version called the Muji 1000. The kind of no brand Muji did a limited run of 1,000 of these cars. They debadged everything. They decontented, I think the word is, where they stripped them of almost everything in the car you can imagine, like no radio, vinyl back seats, and sold them as an marketing experiment in like an unbranded badgeless vehicle. I've never seen one. I only really learnt about it researching about this car yesterday. Couldn't even find a picture of one. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this little trip down more of Nissan's history, really. So we've done the K10, we've done the K11. We need to do the K12 now, I suppose, at some point. We've done the Bluebird. I guess we should look at a Primera and a Stanza, really. So if you've got any of those Nissans, give me a shout. We should get them on the channel and take them for a drive. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.